All right. So my objective in this talk is to try and bring together the different theories about identity, preferences, and norms, and see how they interact with inequality. Because there's so many different words out there that mean or not the same things. And so I want to kind of give an overview of the different theories and how we might understand how identity might be working with inequality. So it's the first thing I want to start out with, well, why do we care about inequality? And apologies to those people who have their careers spent doing measures of inequality. Broadly speaking, inequality is some people have more and some people have less. And again, why do we care? So as social scientists, we typically want to describe such a pattern. We think there's interesting patterns and we want to understand patterns within society. But why do we concentrate on inequality per se as a pattern of interest? Well, we might argue that inequality per se is bad for growth or bad for development. Somehow we think if there's a maldistribution of income or maldistribution of wealth, that it's going to lead to lower overall economic growth. Okay, so there's certainly folks out there who argue, well, we have to understand inequality as a pattern of interest because it impinges on growth. Another reason we might be studying inequality is because maybe, and I think quite a lot of us feel that inequality is unjust somehow or unfair. The fact that some people have a lot more than other people somehow seems to be unjust. And it's particularly unjust when these inequalities are systematic, and they're systematic in the sense that certain groups have more and certain groups have less, or people who in certain groups have more and certain groups have less. So inequality is not randomly distributed. It's not just you can take a population and just say, well, no matter who you are or how you look or what language you speak or what color is your skin, you somehow fall randomly on this income distribution or wealth distribution. No, that's not that way. It's actually systematic. Certain groups of people have more and certain groups have less. So of course we can go through many, many countries and many societies. In the United States we would think about blacks, Hispanics. In Europe we might think of North Africans, Africans, the Roma, in Eastern Europe. And again, you can pick your favorite example. We could go to other continents. And I do want to also say that in many parts of the world, including the United States, women have less than men. Okay, so we want to include that the certain social groups here, it can include women versus men. Right? So, so now, as in my bottom of the last slide, bottom here, we're starting now to talk about inequality as being, how about this? There's a social system, or there's social differences that are related to inequality, right? So we can see that certain people have more and certain people have less, and we can talk about them in terms of these different social groupings. So we've started to talk about people in social terms, and the word I'm going to use is social categories. So how does identity figure into this? This word identity is now, we're now using that. What does it mean? So at a minimum, identity is a designator of a person within a social group. So we just say, oh, this person is black, this person is a woman, this person is North African or a Muslim or Catholic or whatever it might be. So at a minimum, identity, we can just say, is somebody who is within a particular social group. So the other words are like race, ethnicity, and so on, class. Okay, so identity could just be a better descriptor, a more precise descriptor than that, since we shouldn't be using the word race at all anymore. Right? So for example. So at a minimum, we can just use it as a way to measure the differences that different people in social groups have more or less income or wealth. But I think we want to do more than that. I think we want to do more because we want to understand how does identity figure into inequality, which means we have to embellish what we understand by identity. So is it just a mere descriptor, or is identity somehow a part of the process that creates and sustains inequality? Right? So what are the processes by which we think that some people will end up having more and some people will end up having less, given that they're members of certain groups? Well, now we can start talking about things like discrimination against people who are in particular groups, norms for behavior, what we think is appropriate and inappropriate behavior, social differences. I think I'm like somebody, but I think I'm not like somebody else. So some of these themes have already come up in today's discussion. So if I think I'm different than somebody else, well, then I can shock them, for example, with an electric shock. Or at least we will once we have your control. We'll know whether this is true, right?
2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now, we'll know. I'm sure it's, my guess is it's true. So what I want to do now is, I'm going to start building up the ways in which economists have understood discrimination, norms, or prescriptions for behavior and social differences. So what I'm going to do is give an overview of the theoretical approaches to these things on the bottom here. And if I have time, though I probably won't, use the vocabulary that's been developed to compare two specific models of minority education. So to fix ideas, I'm going to take a look at, say, kids. Kids are deciding whether or not to invest in their education. And can we see this decision-making on the part of these children or adolescents in the terms that we've now described, right? And so I kind of want to contrast two specific models if I have time. Those are the two models. And then what I do, though, want to leave time for some experimental work which I've done, which is specifically on identity and inequality, which is asking the question, do people actually have preferences for inequality? So there's much ado in the experimental literature that people have these social preferences. People are fair, they are inequity averse, right? People are willing to give up some money to go to some 50-50 split. So there's a lot of work out there about inequity aversion, right? And I'm just going to ask, one of the things that we ask in the context of this experiment is, do people actually have preferences for inequality or inequity? Are they inequity loving rather than inequity averse? Right, and the answer is yes. We're going to see a group of people, a well-identified group of people, that really what their objective here is to have more than the other person. In fact, they're willing to give up own income in order to make the other person more worse off. Does that make, to have the other person lose even more than they do. So they're destroying surplus. Well, so it's gone under several names in the literature. So it's called competitiveness, which we've decided to trash because a competitive person or a competitive outcome is good in economics. So we're not using, these people are competitive. We call them, we've gone through many terms. Inequity loving might be one of the terms we could use. So spiteful is another word that's been used out there. But what I want to emphasize is this inequity loving, which we see experimentally. Some people have picked it up. We see it in spades in a group setting. So it really turns on when you've divided subjects into two different groups.
Why do you call it so? This is not inequity aversion. I mean,
it's the opposite.
No, sorry, inequity loving, in the sense that they like to be.
No,
they like
as
to be
long
on top.
as they're on. Yes, exactly. So that's why we shouldn't really use that terminology either, because that could mean that it doesn't matter who's winning.
It's kind of a status thing.
Yes, it's a status seeking. Status seeking is another. Dominance seeking is
advantageous inequality.
Advantageous inequality. So anyone could give you a great word for this. I think we're sort of settling on dominance seeking, which is a little heavy. So, but we all know what it is now, right? Okay. And so that we're picking up on this, again, I guess this implicates the idea of social differences or social distance. Just that basic notion, right, as being an important source of inequality. Okay. Okay, so let me go through the just this general overview of some theoretical approaches. Then I'm going to put them in the context of education, and then perhaps if I have time, do specific models. Okay, so we've all grown up on this. We all learned this in our first year micro classes, and amazingly enough, I still teach this to my undergrads. What's really striking for those who else teaches intermediate micro to undergrads, the book has not changed.
You've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same stuff I learned, right? Exactly the same stuff I learned too many years ago. So there's a basic economic model. In the basic economic model, you're going to think about the individual as the decision maker. So this is just like basic consumer theory. So individuals have some utility from their own choices and actions. So they have preferences over different consumption goods. And these preferences are assumed to be exogenous. We don't know where they come from. I like apples or I like oranges, more or less. I face a budget constraint possibly, or that I'm operating with particular technology, and then the choices lead to some patterns of behavior. So given prices and income, I choose between apples and oranges. Okay, so that's the basic ingredients of the basic economic model are individual choice, exogenous preferences, technology, and constraints. Okay. Now we can build on top of a basic economic model strategic interaction. Okay? In strategic interaction, the individuals now have payoffs from their own and others' actions, right? And they are facing possibly idiosyncratic costs and benefits from own and other actions. Just think of a game. You write down a game, right? And in that payoffs, you have own actions and other actions, and you have cost of own actions and benefits of own actions, perhaps as others act, right? And so the game form, which might be the institutions, okay, again, exogenous, right? And this game form can also specify various information asymmetries and so on. From that, we're going to get some sort of equilibrium outcome, which is giving a pattern of behavior. Okay, so this is just the next layer. So on top of the basic economic model, we can build a game. Okay. Now, within both of these models, we can start thinking about preferences, the preferences that are determining the utilities and the payoffs from people's actions. Okay? So within these basic models, people have preferences. And if we think about the preferences that are going to appear in the basic model or the models of strategic interaction, the basic notion of preferences are what a person likes or doesn't like. So people like apples or people like oranges.
Yeah. So in the description you have so far, I'm a little surprised that you haven't distinguished information, because certainly some part of some theories about identity have to do with what I can infer.
Yeah, that will be in here. So I have not yet said how we're going. So what I guess I'm building is that all of these everything on here can be used to understand identity and inequality. Mm-hmm. Does that make so? So I think all of these are useful. I'm not trying to throw any of them out. Okay, so I'm actually think every single one of these frameworks can be really useful for understanding identity and inequality. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'm going to try and tease out they're useful for what aspects. Okay? So information, yeah, information is important. So we have things like statistical discrimination, stereotypes, and so on, which can go on in here. Okay? So perhaps I wasn't clear. I'm not only trying to support this. I'm not only trying to say that Akerlof and Kranton is the way to go. Actually, we can learn a lot from all of these different models. I'm just trying to build it up in layers. Okay? So the preferences that underlie the basic economic model or the models of strategic interaction, so we usually think of them as exogenous, right? We usually think of them as exogenous, and they're all about what a person likes or doesn't like. So I like apples, you like oranges. What Becker has added to that is the idea that you might actually like some person interacting with someone and not like interacting with another person, right? So we can extend the basic notion of preferences to include these kind of social differences, right? So Becker, you know, again, we all know his theories of discrimination, or his theory of the family, where you like or your likes or don't likes can involve people and interacting with different people in different ways. I think the way to understand what George and I have done is we've added the notion of prescriptions or norms as an expanded view of preferences. That might be a way of understanding what we've done. And this is what a person should or shouldn't do. It's not only what they like and they don't like. It's not that I like apples and I don't like oranges. It's that I should like apples or I should like oranges or not, depending on who I am. Okay? So then we've added prescriptions, and that's in parentheses norms. We had a whole big discussion of whether we should call it prescriptions or norms, because norms have actually been used here. But we'll get to that in a second. So if we want to expand the basic economic model or the strategic interaction model and think about a richer view of preferences or these prescriptions as an enriched type of preferences, Then if you combine these with technology constraints and the strategic interaction, so technology and constraints and strategic interaction, you can get the choices and the equilibria give the patterns for behavior. Okay, so I just want to build, in some sense, a way of understanding the way economic theories may begin to attack how individuals being understood within different social categories can lead to different processes and different outcomes of inequality. So now I'm going to try and put some guts on this. And again, what I'll be, hopefully, so I'm going to try and use this education story running through them. Okay? All right, so let's see if we can understand kids' choices about education and running through these three different, or these build-up kind of models. So let's start with the basic economic model. So in a basic economic model, you're going to take an individual with a utility function. They have exogenous idiosyncratic preferences, and they make choices given the technology available to them and the constraints, right? Standard. Okay, so let's think about a kid. So a kid likes or doesn't like school. Okay, so that would be their preferences. A kid likes or doesn't like school, or perhaps they're more or less talented at schoolwork, so they're born more skilled or less skilled. This kid weighs the costs and benefits of schooling, and given the school quality, so given the quality of the school that this kid attends, and the opportunity costs of attending school, and perhaps the information job networks, you're going to get a choice. The kid's going to make a choice about how much, schooling to get. So you might, from this, have the following pattern. Blacks in the United States, or black males, have actually lower levels of academic achievements. And what would be the explanation? So this is what we observe by the standard economic model. What would be the explanation? Well, we can only look within the model. Well, maybe they attend worse schools. So that the schools that they attend actually are worse. They have not as good funding, the teachers aren't as good, and so on. So there's less returns for their effort in school, so they just won't learn as much. Or perhaps they have less information about jobs and so on. With girls, you could say the same thing. Girls have lower levels of academic achievement. We know this is not true in the United States anymore, but it is in other countries, right? So girls might have lower levels of academic achievements because they have high opportunity costs of time, because they're busy taking care of their brothers and sisters at home, right? So we know that that's the case in many countries, right? And so our pattern that girls have lower levels of academic achievement, we go and we look at what our model would tell us is responsible for it, and we have our list, the opportunity cost, the technology and the constraints, and their tastes, or perhaps their talents. So some of this actually may be true. It may be exactly right that girls don't go to school in many countries because there is a high opportunity cost of their time. And so we should recognize that. That actually could be what is driving that inequality. So these models are very useful because, of course, the technology could be leading to such patterns, and the constraints that people are facing indeed could be leading to these patterns of inequality. Now, I will, though, argue that we shouldn't stop there because, of course, this begs the question why certain children are less talented at schoolwork. So we're here in HCEO land. Why is it that some kids are able to persevere more than others at school, right? So why that way? Why is it true that actually blacks attend worse schools? Why is the funding for schools in certain neighborhoods less, or the good teachers aren't there, or the administration is messed up? Why? Why do we have that situation? And why should women, or really girls, attend to household chores, right? So you see that, yes, we can have the basic economic model, which is going to get us some answers, but we just don't want to stop with those. I think we should be asking, again, why these particular technologies and why these constraints? Okay. So we actually want to think about these factors that are exogenous in the basic model and try and understand where they may be coming from.
You can still have explanations for those that have nothing to do with identity, right?
These, yes. I mean, the technology and the constraints. Yeah. Yes. So again, yes. So again, that's what I'm saying. I think if we want to understand identity and inequality, we shouldn't only go to this notion of prescriptive norms for behavior, right? There's a lot of levels at which there can be historical circumstances that people were living in certain regions of the country and so on. I mean, but we should be attentive to technology and constraints and sort of the things that we would typically look for. But then we might want to understand, why do they continue to be that way? This gets to policy change and some issues that we've already discussed. Okay? All right, so now let's do a theory that we're going to embellish our model, or we're going to add strategic interaction. So again, individual payoffs now depend on their own preferences and others' actions. So we have a profit function or a utility function where the payoffs have other actions involved, and we're strategic, so we're not going to do a competitive equilibrium here. People are strategic, they're making choices strategically, they're taking into account how others react, and we find an equilibrium, and that is a social pattern. So the one thing I want to say is that if you look back at a lot of the previous literature on norms in economics, some of the first papers and up until now, you'll see people say, well, I'm going to write down this game, I'm going to look at the equilibrium, and aha, that's the social norm. So social norm sort of was interpreted as an equilibrium in a strategic game. Okay, which is why the word norm is very hard to sort of use within economics. So what are we talking about? Right? So one way it's been historically used is as an equilibrium in a strategic game. So we see an equilibrium, we say that's the norm. Okay? So just to be careful about the terminology, which is one of the reasons why we decided not to use the word norm, though I think we now have gone back to it.
Why
Georgia.
do you need the strategic interaction in the sense of the school sets what you should? Okay.
Okay. So, because there's different policy responses. There ultimately, depending on what we think the source is, there might be different policy responses. So that's actually my last slide, so I hope I'll get there too. Okay.
No, but I think it could be there, but I think you could get identity type effects without having strategic interaction.
Yeah, so I guess I'm saying, yeah, you can get effects.
Not technology and constraints.
Okay.
Just the school saying, this is what we like. You want to be what the school likes, irrespective of what the other people are doing. That's not a strategic interaction in the sense of what I'm doing versus what another kid in the school is doing. Maybe it's strategic in the sense of what the school is doing is an optimal choice.
Right. So so the back there in the previous slide, it's I don't know if the institutions is on here on this slide. It's not. But anyway, yeah. So you could think of that. The school has set certain. You're saying the school has set certain rules, and the kids are reacting to those rules, but it doesn't have to be that they're reacting to each other.
Well, the school is affecting the preference.
Yes, the school's affecting the preferences. So I haven't made preferences endogenous yet. So, but yes, so I don't need strategic interaction. I could just go directly between the school, some one person who say the administration of a school and the kids without having the kids interact amongst each other. You could do that, yeah. But then it does become that the institution of the school is reacting to just the kids. Right, so like you just said. So we do have a model of that, though it includes the other dimension too, but you don't need it. Right. Okay, so you've got individual payoffs depending on own preferences and others' action. Okay, so this is a game. So for example, there's lots of models out there where essentially you have a repeated game. These individuals are interacting with another, and there is people are punishing those who violate what is the equilibrium action. And this equilibrium can be sort of a bad social norm. So going back to Akerlof's paper on the caste system, right? So in that paper, people don't shop at certain stores, because if they were to shop at certain stores, they would be shunned by their neighbors. And if they don't shun the shunners, then they get shunned, as we were sort of talking about earlier. You kind of get this infinite stream of punishments. And you can get to this bad social norm where nobody is hiring people of a certain ethnicity because they'll be, when we'll shop at those stores, and so on and so forth. So equilibria can be a bad social norm. In another type of a game, you can have a signaling game where the actions are indicating some underlying unobserved attribute, and the equilibrium is a social norm. So again, So we see, oh, we're going to have people not do well. This is one of the papers that I probably won't have time to go through later, the Austin Smith Fryer paper, whereas people don't go to school, African American kids don't go to school because they want to signal some underlying attribute, which is that they're loyal to their community, right? And again, that's strategic interaction is the equilibrium of a game between the individuals and their community, and the equilibrium is called a social norm. Okay. So once we have these structures, you can add labels, right, to them, and you have the theory. So I guess this is what I was just saying. So for the repeated game story, you might say, well, girls invest less in school because they'll face worse marriage prospects, right? So they're not going to, and why not? Because if a kid, if a family's son marries a girl who has education, then that family, they get a lot of grief from their mother-in-law and various people in the village and so on. And so that can sustain this bad social norm where people don't, in that particular community, don't actually educate their girls, right? So that's the repeated game sort of story. The signaling story is the one that I've just told you about. Maybe African Americans don't achieve in school because if they don't achieve in school, it actually reveals that they're dedicated to providing public goods to their community.
So it seems to me in the literature there are two distinct signaling stories, and one of them is kind of an out-group reference, and the other is kind of an in-group reference. So what is, I'm struggling a little bit within this account is that when I think about social identity, I think that that part of it comes from what I choose. So I have part of my identity is private, part of my identity is social. The part that's social, part of it has to do with my choices, but part of it is out of my control. It's how others perceive me, right? So, and that's something I really kind of can't control. So the Austin Fryer story is a kind of story where I'm controlling my identity by saying I'm doing this to signal my membership in the group. On the other hand, the statistical discrimination signaling stories, right, and those can be done in a game theoretic way or in an equilibrium way,
right,
are ones where you take the actions you take because the group outside views you a certain way.
Right.
And that's
right.
a distinct
Well,
phenomenon.
but even in the signaling story, it depends on the beliefs, right? It depends on the beliefs of the person who's reading the signal. Right, so the people.
Well,
so it's
so
still
we
an
have a
equilibrium
problem.
notion.
We have a problem. It's an
Right.
equilibrium story. So we have
Right.
There are no causal arrows, right?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
if we were to draw causal arrows, if we were to build a more complicated
Right.
dynamic thing, we would say that
Right.
in I think the Austin Fryer kind of world, if you take certain actions, you will be perceived this way, right? And it's up to you. I mean, in other words, there's
Only
a code.
in equilibrium.
No, hey, right. But whereas on the other hand, if you take the action you take in the signaling in the statistical discrimination literature, because you cannot affect how other people perceive you, and that's a difference, right? It's not reflected in the math because both are equilibrium, right? We're not drawing any causal arrows, okay? But
Right.
the logic of the stories are really quite different.
Okay, so I'm going to put that in parentheses.
Or even erase it.
No, it's a really good point. I don't think it's. I think it's an elaboration of what's on here. So, I guess what I want to say is that these, again, I'm not going to argue for or against these models, because I'd actually think they're useful, and that distinction that you just raised could yet be another useful.
Well, I just want to say that signaling, I guess when you say the phrase signaling game, the problem is in general that looking at equilibrium models, you only get so far.
Okay, that's this slide.
Right.
Okay.
And now you want to, if you want to cut further, that's
right. So again, I'm going to say that just like I did with the basic model, we can go certain ways, and it's very useful, but then we can only get so far. So that's kind of the theme. So in these models of strategic interaction, so this inequality in some sense is a capricious outcome of strategic interaction, right? So there's no social context per se in these models. So in these models, there's nothing particularly meaningful. So now I'm starting to add some interesting words here. Social context and meaning, as in social meaning, about being black, being female, being North African, or so on. So if we just want to ignore social context or social meaning for the moment, these strategic interaction models can be very useful because indeed these social norms out there may indeed be bad equilibria. So again, I don't think we should just throw out the idea that sometimes we see stuff there that's just a bad equilibrium, you know? Nobody's educating their girls because they're all concerned about their girls getting married. And again, you know, this may be actually part of what's going on. And what we typically do when we see such, you know, multiple equilibria or bad equilibria, we think that the policy response, or what do we do about this, is intervention. There's some sort of intervention needed to change equilibria. So we can look in the United States and we see, yeah, okay, we can see in the United States, for example, that there have been interventions which are trying to get us out of bad equilibria, right? I love Title IX. Title IX's an amazing thing. You should, you know, again, read Betsy Stevenson's work on Title IX and how it's dramatically changed girls and, you know, what girls in the United States are actually doing, okay? So again, but then there's the how far does it get us question. So how far does it get us is that the theoretical, maybe somewhat, it gets us somewhere, but the theoretical requirements to sustain such equilibria are very strong. So how does all of this shunning go on and on forever, right? This stream of shunning, it goes on forever. Maybe actually people believe that it's right not for a girl to get education. You know, so we might actually want to say, is this real? Do we really think this is going on behind some of these phenomena? Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. And that when we think about these bad equilibria, or we think about these kinds of patterns, there's an enormous discussion out there, and debates and conflicts in the literature and the press and law, and you know, there are activists that, and this is just the point, this intervention that we talk about that's needed to change the bad equilibrium, it's not coming for free, and it's not coming on its own. Right? It's not like there's just some beneficent social planner out there that said, oh, this is really bad. You guys should be educating your girls. You should be hiring African Americans, right? It just doesn't, you know, happen. It's actually this intervention happens through a lot of struggle, and people die in efforts to effect change or to block change, right? Which means that, again, the strategic models, they can be very useful, but we again have to push it back one more level, okay? So again, I'm sort of saying that the basic model and the strategic interaction model, they're all very useful, but they're still sort of forcing us to go back one more level. And so now I get to plug some of the work that George and I have been doing. Okay. So I think one place we can go to push this back to the source is to think about preferences and to think about these prescriptive norms. So the preferences, again, I'm just sort of making this distinction between liking and not liking something and prescriptive norms that you should or shouldn't do something. So, so it could be that you like and you don't like something, and that like and don't like could be related to who that person is. So I like working with women, or I don't like working with women, right? And you know what? Maybe that actually matters, okay? So we know that Gary Becker, again, great time to be talking about this. I think his memorial conference is, I think it's next week, right? He has this taste-based theory of discrimination. So in the same way that some people like apples and some people like oranges, some people might not want to work with blacks or women. And so we know how this movie ends. Employers might not want to hire this group because the workers with these tastes would require a wage premium. And then back to the education story, is that a black or woman might then have lower benefits of education because they know they're not going to get such a good job. But we know that perfect competition would eliminate high-cost firms, and this all goes away. But I italicized, of course, the perfect part because, you know, market failures would lead to, you know, this, you know, eliminating discriminating firms can survive if we don't have perfect competition. So I just want to kind of throw it out there that maybe preferences per se actually matter. Okay, so not getting even to the prescriptive stuff that George and I are really into, which is that you know, it's appropriate to act this way or it's inappropriate to act this way. Though I guess one could say it's inappropriate to not want to work with a woman. One might argue that, but okay. Just stopping at this basic level, preferences per se may matter. They may still matter because competition isn't perfect. Okay, so I just want to do a little aside. This is in somewhat in honor of Linda. So this is a little bit aside on what I'm going to call stereotypes or prejudice. So just to bring in statistical discrimination a little bit, or prejudice, or just this idea about preferences, just who do you like to hang out with? Who do you like to spend time with? Okay? So if we want to again think about an employment, now we're kind of moving to employment, an employment situation, which is, of course, the end game from somebody getting education. So I'm thinking about what type of education I should be doing, how much should I be working in school, and I'm thinking about employment, right? So the demanders of me who are getting an education, they may be suffering from some sort of, there may be a statistical discrimination equilibrium in the market, right? And so I, as a woman, I'm not going to invest in, say, an engineering degree because everybody thinks that I'm not actually don't have what it takes to be an engineer, so I may not invest in those types of skills. Well, statistical discrimination is now illegal, so presumably that shouldn't be taking place. Just noting that it is illegal. But what about on the supply side?
What do you actually mean by that?
What, that it's illegal?
Yeah.
It is. It's in the law.
In what dimension?
So if you look at
Hiring?
in hiring,
Okay.
yeah, in hiring. So you cannot hire. You cannot decide not to hire somebody because you presume that they're going to have the qualities of the average of their group. You have to look for their individual qualities.
Yeah, but enforcement's going to be rather.
Absolutely. I'm not getting towards enforcement's a whole issue.
But you said it's as if it couldn't happen.
Oh, no. Oh, sorry. Right, wrong. No, not that it shouldn't happen, but just that the law has recognized that this is an issue. Okay? Not at all that it couldn't happen, but the law has recognized that this is an issue in the United States.
Groups.
Sorry?
Or particular
Yes.
groups. It's really any hiring.
Yes.
There's statistical discrimination that's happening.
Of course.
It's just what you can condition.
And exactly, and how you can enforce it, exactly. So, sorry, this is a misleading bullet point. This is to say that the law, there have been decisions about statistical discrimination, and everything that you all have just said is completely true. Okay.
What about preference? Can I don't hire somebody because I don't like that group?
No, that's also illegal, too.
Only if it's a protected class. We could discriminate against vegetarians, for example, right?
So this is getting, yeah, so.
We cannot.
We can, right?
So
not
it's
a
under
protected
this.
class.
It's under the Civil Rights Act. So it's ever protected under the Civil Rights Law, right? Which is why you now see people, fighting over adding homosexuality to that list of things, right? Right. Okay. So now, so I want to move to another. This is an aside. This is a little bit of an aside, but I kind of do think it's an important aside. This is why I have it in here. So this is just think about from the point of view of the employers. Maybe the employers are absolutely fine with, hiring women. But they just don't think they can do the job, right? That might be some way in which women will not be investing in a particular, a particular field, for example. But I also want to think about from the point of view of the woman, thinking about working, or a minority, and working in an environment where people don't really like them. Okay? Right, so we don't have to go to statistical discrimination. We can just think about, okay, so I'm thinking about going into a field or getting an education that will give me to a particular career path, and then I'm going to be working in an environment where these people don't really like me. Right, now, a hostile harassment and hostile work environment is, again, now illegal, but, right, again, this is an extremely high legal bar for this harassment and hostile work environment. I mean, people have to really be after you for you to be able to, win a harassment case or to argue that's a hostile work environment. So the work environment could still be really, really unpleasant if there's people who are in that work environment who don't really like you because of who you are. So again, this is the preferences. It's all Becker language, right? They don't like me because of who I am. And I haven't gotten into what I should or shouldn't be doing yet. They just don't like me. Or they have presumptions about my habits, about who I am as a person, how I behave. That, again, it's a stereotype kind of prejudice argument, right? Okay, and so maybe they matter. And so I just want to give the women in tech story. I don't know if you have who's seen this. Who's seen this slide? Okay, so there's a lot of.
What is Maven?
So Maven is some sort of plugin. I actually don't. It's some sort of plugin for some sort of program. I can't read that. So there was a recent conference. So there's been a lot of articles out there about how the few women are actually working in technology and in IT, right? Especially in the development of this. And so this got a lot of play in the tech press. So this is a presentation of some developer, and he's talking about this plugin, and he's saying why it doesn't work well. Well, because it's like his girlfriend looks beautiful, complains a lot, demands my attention, interrupts me when I'm working, and doesn't play well with my other friends. Okay, so this is, he's giving, what? This is an actual slide, yeah. So
People are surprisingly stupid.
yes, so people are surprisingly stupid, but
Receive a lot of attention.
yes, no, you see this slide?
No.
Yeah.
But I mean, now I know about it.
Right, and so
Now I know what Maven is. I would never have known.
So, and again, what I just want to go back to say Becker was onto something, right? Maybe, that people simply don't like or have certain images of certain kinds of people, and it has nothing to do with what they're supposed to be doing or violating a norm.
Don't know his girl.
No, we don't know his girlfriend, and you should read. I've stayed up too late at night reading all of the comments about all of these things. It's his girlfriend. It's not really how he thinks about all women, and what if this said boyfriend, and all sorts of things. So, but in any case, the question is there's a young woman out there in college, and she's deciding whether to go into tech, and she's thinking, I got to work with this guy, right? So again, preferences per se, or what people, the sort of images, so I guess I don't even know what to call these things, stereotypes and prejudices that aren't statistical discrimination. It's just, this person isn't going to respect me because of who I am. That's what I read from this. Okay? And just because we're on the tech, and this is going to come up later, another women in tech say, okay, all right, this is for you. This is for you. It's for you, Linda. So who's seen this kerfuffle? Okay, so a lot more people have seen this, right? So this is the Microsoft CEO basically at a conference for women in tech and telling women that they shouldn't ask for pay raises because, if you don't ask for pay raises, you've got good karma. It'll all come back to you someday. Now that's the strength that, it's superpowers that, quite frankly, women who don't ask for raises actually have, is they've got good karma because they don't ask for raises. Okay. So now this, by the way, is not this is not.
Well, then, I don't know if you heard the defense of him by the provost of Claremont.
No.
Oh, who's a woman, of course, and they said, well, he really means this for everybody.
Yes, so that's apparently what his apology was all about. It's like, this is the advice he got. Anyway, so now this slide is actually not just he doesn't like to work with women. This is now about how, I think, getting more into how women should and shouldn't behave. He's sort of saying that, as women, or he's just thinking that it just doesn't seem right that a woman should be doing this. There's a flavor of that here. Okay, so I just put it up because the theme is women in tech, even though it's going to move us to the next point, which is
just getting back to that. It's actually what Peter Glick calls benevolent sexism. That is that we can behave in a sexist way, but it kind of looks benevolent because here he's talking about women, putting them on a pedestal, like having these superpowers. This is so great, but the implication is still sexist. So.
Excellent, right? So this is my segue into the norms, right? Is that so one aspect of the of these sorts of ingredients to the basic economic model that we want to amplify is a wider notion of preferences, the way Becker has done so, and we also want to amplify it in terms of what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior for people of different types. And so that's what George and I are about. So now the idea is that individuals think of themselves more or less consciously in terms of social categories, And we have these tastes or likes or dislikes, but we also have these prescriptions and norms for how people are supposed to behave.
Can I ask how you distinguish this from preferences? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure you're going to talk about this. But
No, not really. I mean, so again, this is something that's been hammered at us so many times, and I guess we've come down to the idea is that they are preferences. Essentially,
people internalize these
Exactly.
norms,
They're in-
these prescriptions.
right.
So
right. So you can think of them as internalized norms, and so then they become your preferences.
So I like women who don't ask for a raise.
Yes, right, exactly. But what's different between, so the big distinction between what I'll call the Becker view of preferences and our view of this amplified preferences is that the preferences that we're talking about are not idiosyncratic and randomly distributed within the population and exogenous. So the typical view of I like apples and you like oranges, which is I like working with blacks or I don't like working with blacks, that would be the direct translation, would be, well, it's just, you woke up one day and that's how you are, right? And so they're somehow idiosyncratic, they're randomly distributed, they're exogenous.
Well,
And so we
they
want,
don't even evolve over time at all. Right?
exactly, right.
This is where you're saying the preferences depend on the environment.
Right, and you're taught them, you've learned them, and people may have incentives to change them, and so on. So we're starting to get into the world. It's basically endogenous preferences, but in the world of endogenous preferences, it's related to these social categories. But also, I do think the shoulds are very important here, because it's not just that I've internalized the norm for myself. I get really mad if you act against the norms. So there's an externality, right, that comes from this appropriate and inappropriate behavior. So if you act inappropriately, I get upset and I may punish you. So that's, of course, what you've got in your model, too. One of your little, I think it's your, yeah.
So do you feel compelled at this moment to talk about where these kind of, so what you're saying here is that unlike Becker, these preferences are in fact social constructs, right? Mm-hmm. And so are you going to talk about where they come from?
So yes and no. So the answer to that is yes, they're social constructs, and so that's a way of understanding the distinction. I'll tell you how far we've gotten in knowing where they've come from, and I guess it depends on where they come from, how deep we want to get there. So hold on a second. Can I just? You want to say something?
No. Well, one sentence, and that is that at the end of the day, that if we're to kind of talk about causal models, we want to know what's exogenous, right? And so it can't be that everything is endogenous, right?
Right.
There has to be some raw stuff.
Right. So I guess the way partly, and so here's what I'd say, is in some sense, yes, everything is endogenous, but as analysts, we have to cut it off somewhere and say, I'm going to take this part of the puzzle as exogenous and work with this part of the puzzle, right? So I guess part of it is to say, well, what level do I want to cut and say, this stuff is exogenous and this stuff is what I'm going to worry about.
I said the same thing this morning, so
okay.
I'm very happy with this. Yes.
Right. So I guess the deepest you could possibly go would be to say something along the lines of somewhere, somehow, evolutionarily, we evolved in such a way that somehow we're social beings, and so we care about groups and so on. And you could really, and then we now, as modern human beings, feed into that somehow biological soup that from which we've been created. That would be like the big. That's way too endogenous for me.
I think you'd have to go back.
Yeah.
That
Okay. So that's way too far for me because I don't even because there's many difficulties in these models of evolution and group selection and so on. Let me tell you where we've gotten to. So, okay, where we've gotten to is we say, and I'm going to put up the little model in a second. We kind of have maybe I should get there. Yeah, maybe it's coming, but it's a little bit of a preview. Okay. We both sort of have a short run and a long run. In the short run, we want to take these prescriptions or norms, these prescriptive likes and dislikes as fixed and see how people are operating giving them. In the long run, we might introduce third parties who have incentives to change the norms for certain people to further this third party's objectives. That's what we've done so far. So we have, for example, the principal of a school or a school board might be interested in changing the social arrangements among kids or the social meaning of studying versus not. So they're going to come into the school, they're going to introduce a particular program that's going to make kids feel better about themselves as being a part of the school, because the objective of this third party, the principal, was to achieve higher levels of academic achievement. Okay, so we have gotten to the point of introducing third parties, right? We've also gotten to the point of having these sort of oppositional groups, people wanting to distinguish themselves from somebody else, getting these sort of utility or status benefits. Those utility or status benefits are yet unmodeled. Where those come from, why we like to feel better than other people, I haven't attacked. We haven't attacked, right? So it's a fantastic question, and again, I think we're just sort of have to push the boundaries of that.
Right. I don't see anything wrong with just saying that that people get status from utility, the way that Gary would say people get status from oranges, right? I mean, at some point you've got to take something as primitive in the construction of premises.
Yeah, so I agree
we do this
with
in
that.
game theory all the time.
Yeah, absolutely, but I guess I would say the way, absolutely fine, we can get us a long way, except when we also recognize that what confers status has changed over time. And so then it becomes a societal construct itself. So yes, we could just say this confers status and this doesn't, and let's work with it. But then if we recognize that what confers status has changed over time, then we still have to think about those dynamics, right? So I'm happy to fix some things and work with them, but I do think we then ultimately, all we're doing is pushing our question up another level. But again, we start where we can and we move forward.
It seems to me that you do not have to answer the question, why is it that people care about status at all? Right? That's the question of why this and not that is, yes, something.
Okay.
And essentially what I was saying this morning is that's what I'm struggling with too, on the opposite side with stigma. What is it that makes it this and not that? But the fact that people's preferences are somehow have this social.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that, and again, this is a real digression, but I actually don't think everyone cares about status. It's not a human universal. There are some people who don't care. There are some individuals who just don't care. And so therefore, this is, again, it's that there is a lot of heterogeneity in the population over what we think of as sort of these human things, like caring about status. Some people don't care.
Right, and some people, that's right, some people have completely exogenous, independent preferences, right? But if the whole world were like that, you wouldn't have this research. You wouldn't need this research program.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is that to ignore why people care about status per se, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable saying we should just completely give up on that. Maybe the next generation should do it, of economists should do it, but I'm not sure. I don't think I should take it off of the list as an interesting question. That's all I'm saying. It should remain on the list as an interesting question, but I'm not sure. I know that I'm not going to do it in my lifetime probably, but it's not that it should be off the agenda.
People have looked at this question, at where does status come from, like Meredith and Postlewaite, the first that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Right. So they actually went back to some sort of evolutionary model of mating and status in mating and assortative matching.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole.
So that kind of stuff you do.
There's a whole economic biology of
Right.
this.
Exactly.
Right?
So the question of what is status, that to me is much more fascinating, actually.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
why this and not that?
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. But I'm not completely satisfied by the evolutionary
No,
models.
me neither, but I'm saying people have looked at that.
Yes,
question.
exactly.
I
What I
mean,
guess
there
I was
are
saying,
some answers and-
right. So we can agree more or less about the benefit of the evolutionary perspective that we understand up until today. But let's move on. Okay. So I guess we're all pretty much on the same page. Is what we've just said. Okay, I've said all of this. So the difference between the prescriptions or norms that distinguishes them from just plain old vanilla or chocolate tastes or preferences is that they are not idiosyncratic, they're socially derived, they depend on social identities and social context. So it's not only that I like apples and oranges because I should like apples and oranges, is that I actually should like and eat apples and oranges only in the presence of some other people, but not in the presence of others. Right? So some behavior is appropriate in certain social contexts, but not in others. So it depends on who I'm interacting with and when.
Just many preferences are socially derived, other than identity.
Yeah, like even the preferences for apples and oranges.
So
Yes, but
I don't perfectly understand the distinction at all. Actually, I mean, I
so
understand both
so
concepts,
I guess we have a
I can't hardly think of anything that is not to some extent social.
yeah. So this is wonderful. So then everything is then absolute. So the distinction
I'm
is
just worrying about the whether it's needed. Right? Why not just call it a preference for belonging to a category, wherever it comes from?
well. So it's
and
not
then work with, there's a need or a desire to be included to some group.
right.
And this is why I, follow some path of action to sustain my group membership
Well, because it doesn't
for
all.
various reasons. I mean, it could be resources, status, whatever,
Right.
right? Mating. I mean, you could basically come. I mean, this is context specific. There's not a general one variable explanation for that. I think it's very much context dependent. I think that one of the big problems is there are misconceptions about the true benefits of these group memberships, right? You were asking people, is it actually true that you have the better mates if you don't go to school? Or do you actually know what the wage premium of college education is? People wouldn't know. So they have wrong perceptions about how the world works.
Yeah.
But conditional on their beliefs, whatever they are, isn't it just, people like to belong?
Well,
They like to be part of categories or groups, and whatever makes them belonging is what they do.
That's all good, except I'm completely in agreement with everything you said. I want to have a wider notion of the socially derived preferences that doesn't necessarily have to do with group belonging per se. That's just the distinction.
That's
So
what I mean. Groups is about, but socially derived. I mean, preference for cars, for
Yeah,
consumption.
absolutely.
I mean,
yeah,
iPhones, whatever.
Yes.
What else? I mean, look.
Yes.
I mean, why do we have a MacBook rather than
Right.
I don't know? You have a Dell.
right. Well, it's because if these socially derived preferences can be understood as being attached to people that we understand as being socially distinct in some way. So like the folks that are buying all the bicycles that you described, right? Then that's going to fit this model.
That's groups, though, right?
It's not but groups. So okay, I guess we're just.
I think inclusion is
So I guess I'd say it doesn't have to be a group. It could be a diffuse notion of. Okay, let's move on because I think we're just talking past each other. I think of group as this well-defined, clubby kind of thing, but you're not. So perhaps that's the difference. Okay. All right. So then, do I have time for this? Okay. So how do we operationalize this? So we take a standard model and we add these identity ingredients. And so now I think we'll get a little bit to the short run and the long run distinction that I made before. So you take a set of social categories C. You assign individual and self to these categories. And the norms give the appropriate behavior and the ideal attributes of each social category. So people have utility. And just like in a standard model, they have utility from own actions and others' actions. And so if we didn't have this term, it would just be like the payoffs of a game, right? So now we're adding this identity term. So identity is, that is individual J self-image. And then we give you the ingredients of that. So in an individual's identity depends on own actions, others' actions. Here's an important semicolon. Category assignments, attributes, and the norms. So let me just run through it really quickly. So overall utility depends on how actions and others' actions affect the economic utility. So this is the standard economic model, right there, with strategic interaction, because I've included these other people, and so this could just be the payoffs of a game without that. But we have this other term, right? So own actions and others' actions can affect how I feel about myself, right? So if I've internalized a norm for whether I should eat apples, and I eat oranges instead of apples, I may feel bad about myself. And if other people who are supposedly like me, right, do what they shouldn't do, I've forgotten if they're supposed to eat apples or not, then I'm going to be upset. Okay?
And this is where I should have asked my question before. If you just erase the A not J.
Yeah, you don't need that.
Yeah.
You don't need that.
Because that makes things a lot more complicated.
But it does account for certain kinds of behavior that we see. So it depends on if you're interested in the type of, say, retaliatory behavior that you might see. So people spend energy punishing those who violate social norms. So if you're not interested in that behavior, then you might not need that term. Okay? So this self-image depends on acting as you should, which is the match between own actions and category norms. Whoops. Fitting in, which is the match between your own attributes and the ideal of the category. So this is, in some sense, the extent to which you actually fit within the category you want to be in. Okay, the status. So the status is in there. And here's the bigger, this is getting back to your guys' question there. In the basic case, a person J chooses their actions to maximize utility, taking as given the category assignment, the own attributes, and the norms, right? So that semicolon there is the short run, so taking as given all of these things here, right? But in the long run, these become variables that people can affect. So in general, a person could act to change their own categories. You can decide or try to be a different person. Again, there could be technology and constraints involved with that. Okay, so that becomes another choice where there may to be technology and constraints in your ability or not to become a different person. You can change your own attributes, again, given possible constraints on technology. And people may also act to change the norms themselves. So this would be, for example, a third party might decide to change the notion of what it means to be a woman. You know, you can be a woman and be an engineer, for example. And so third parties or you yourself may act to change those. So I'm not going to have a chance to go through. I was going to now take this sort of framework and run through two different models and show how they work. So I was going to do a signaling model of education and sort of an identity model of education. But I really want to get to these experimental results. I have 10 minutes now?
Almost 15.
Okay. All right. So I was going to run through these two models, but I don't have time. Okay, so let's go through that real quick. So all I was going to do is sort of just go through those models in the language that I've just given you.
Can you just tell us in a couple of minutes what the essential...
Yeah, I pretty much have said it before. Here we go. Okay, so that's where I'm going to go. So basically, the signaling model is set up where people can decide how much education to get, and there's returns to education if the level of education reveals your talent or your skill. So let's take a classic Spence signaling model. Okay, so that's take a Spence signaling model, but you add to it a second audience. The second audience is a peer group. Okay, so now the peer group is interested in accepting high sociability individuals. The peer group wants people that want to hang out and have fun. But there's only one thing you can do to signal your type to both audiences. Okay, that's key. The only thing you can do in that model to signal your type, both your economic talent type and your sociability type, is decide how much to achieve in school. Okay? And so with that constraint on your ability to show, how talented you are, possibly as an employee, or to show how sociable you are, again, there's only one thing that you can do. You're going to, there's a separating equilibrium, and all of the action is going on with the high sociability types. So if you're a high sociability person, you like hanging out with friends, you will underachieve in school in order to signal to the peer group that you're actually a high sociable type. Okay, so that's the guts of the signaling model of the Austin Smith-Fryer model.
The group who does this is endogenous, so this is acting wide. The
Yes.
group who decides to do that as opposed to achieving school is distinguished ex ante in some way?
No.
Some way, or there are two equilibria, either one can be...
No, so it's
The
just
one who decides
there's
to-
a separating equilibrium where, and again, under certain restrictions, as a standard types of restrictions you need to meet.
So
there's
either
multi-
group could be the sociable one in a group.
No, what you have is you basically have two characteristics, sociability and skill, and they're independently distributed. Right? And so the problem, so to speak, is the high sociability types who are also highly skilled. They underinvest in education because they want to be accepted by their peer groups. Okay, so people underinvest. Okay, but again, so that's how that model works.
Yeah, you've got two single crossing properties, the classical one in Spence.
Right, and then another one over
which is that
sociability.
education is cheaper for the more productive to
Right.
the employer. But this new one, which is that the opportunity cost of the time you spend in education is more expensive to the high sociability
Exactly.
time. So high education can signal both,
Right.
both sociability and high economic productivity.
Exactly. Right. So that's how that model works. And it's a very nice model, except that there's nothing in there that says this is about African Americans per se. Nothing. There's only one parameter, which is the value of accepting somebody into your peer group, that you could possibly move up and down and make some predictions over different types of people. So this could easily be about any minority. Absolutely. So there's nothing in the model that has a social meaning attached to anything, right? So that's what I mean by you can build this model, and maybe kids are facing this trade-off, but Hispanic kids could be facing it, Asian kids could be there's nothing in there that's telling us that this is an African American phenomenon. Maybe it isn't, but I think it's important to recognize that the strategic models that are built, that's why I said made a distinction between a strategic model where the equilibrium is then relabeled and interpreted as, this is the phenomenon I'm trying to model. But it's not really including all of this other things that we think are going on, which is the debate over what does it mean to be black, what does it mean to be Asian, is it appropriate for kids to be leaving home when they graduate from college. I mean, all sorts of things that are going on when they graduate from high school, sorry. All sorts of different things that can be going on within communities. So,
don't you have the same degree of freedom in defining categories then?
So that's a great question, and the answer is no, I don't have the same degree of freedom. Because I don't make it up as to what I'm going to say the content of a category is. There's an enormous amount of research out there by folks who are not economists, but now increasingly by economists, about what these categories mean. So
that I accept, but in terms of a model, it's C to start with, or I signal something vis-a-vis some audience, which
Right.
I could also call
right.
my African
So
community or my
yeah.
Jewish community. Or
Perfect.
whatever it is.
So again, I guess we would say that, no, I don't want you to just take my model and apply it anywhere willy-nilly. I want you to take the model, apply it to a specific context, understand what's going on in that context, understand how people themselves and their understanding, understand these categories. So it's not do anything you want, it's do your homework. Okay, and if you're talking about a particular institutional environment, you have to understand that institutional environment. And it's possible you get it wrong, because the people who are observing that institutional environment may be having those biases, and anthropologists have been debating this forever, right? So we know there's problems with that, but that doesn't absolve us from actually knowing, getting as best a handle we can on that particular setting, what those categories could possibly mean and entail. So we want to put meat on all of those bones. Otherwise, we don't know what we're doing.
I agree.
Okay, so so I didn't have a chance to explain, so I really want to show you this really cool experimental result. So I'm not going to explain in the 2 minutes our education model. Okay, so I explained the other one, but not ours. Okay, so here's what I want to say. So I want to get to experiments, and this is identity and inequality in experiments. So do people behave differently towards others depending on their identity or the social group in experimental contexts? So now I actually want to do lab experiments in economics, okay? And there's this growing set of experiments where the social category or the identity of the person, of the subjects, is being used within the experimental setup. And so understanding the implications of social categories and identities is an explicit research objective. So this is the question that I'm after. Do people have preferences for inequality? Right? And the answer is yes. Okay. So let me just get straight to what we've done. Okay, well, let me just skip to the slide. I'll tell you what all that was about. Okay, so the premise, the starting point from this research is all of these experiments out there that show this inequity aversion, right? So that you bring people into the lab and people are inequity averse, they're willing to give up some money and to try and get a more equitable outcome. And this is the whole body on social preferences, so how much do I care about my income versus somebody else's income, Okay? And there's many experiments that are on social preferences and the distribution of social preferences and so on. Yan Chen and Sherry Lee did an experiment around, it's a while ago now, probably 6 years ago, where they did this in the group context. So they used what's called a minimal group paradigm. It's borrowed from social psychology. You bring subjects into the lab, you divide them into arbitrary groups according to their stated preferences on paintings, for example, by Clay and Kandinsky. You divide subjects into groups, and then they allocate income between self and somebody else, whether the person is in their group or the person's out of the group. And they showed when they look at that estimation, on average, people are inequity averse, right? But they're less inequity averse towards somebody outside their group. Okay? So you want to think they're more fair towards people in their group, less fair to people out of their group, but they're still overall fair. It's just more fair or less fair. Okay, you with me? So, well, I love that paper. It's a beautiful paper. My general take on this whole inequity aversion literature is I don't get it. When has the world been fair? The human history is full of group divisions, exploitation, genocide. So I just don't get it that you're going to go and find that human beings are generally fair. Okay, I just don't get it. So, so what we're out for is testing these social preferences contingent on the social context. So we actually want to see, okay, now we put people into groups, but I actually want to do a bit more than what Chen and Lee did. Is I want to make this a salient group. I want to see if I can ramp this up and see what happens.
You may want to add that, I mean, all of the literature shows negative inequity is much stronger than positive.
What do you mean by negative?
Yeah. Emotionally, in MRI studies, but also in behavioral experiments, people hate to be in a disadvantageous position.
Oh, exactly.
But the disutility coming from an advantageous inequality is very weak. The evidence is mild.
The utility coming from an advantageous position.
And
right.
You know, the dictator game is super malleable. You know, you have to play around slightly. It is super sensitive to framing, etc., etc. So when we talk about inequity aversion, what's really established is people hate to be behind.
Yeah.
Right? This is why many people actually call it behindism. The evidence on being above, I mean, there's beautiful work by George and co-authors who actually, you know, but that evidence is much weaker. It depends on social context.
Well, that's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. And so let me give you the. So let me just tell you the experiment. So basically you have subjects. They get to choose between one allocation of income and another allocation of income. So I is the decision maker. They choose between money for self and for somebody else. This is another allocation for self and somebody else. And so either this is somebody, the person that you're giving the money to is either in your group or out of your group. Okay? And so you do many of these choices. So there's a random.
Both groups at the same time?
No, I'm going through this now. Okay, so in one condition, it's just a random match. So you're not actually divided into groups. It's just some other subject in the experiment you're told you're giving money to. In another treatment, you're divided into groups by these minimal group criteria. And another treatment, you're divided into groups by Republicans versus Democrats.
And the minimal group is known. I mean, they know that they've been divided by
yes.
that.
Yes. Yes. So you're told based on the results of the survey, we've divided you into two groups. Okay. And what's cool here, well, anyway, I don't have much time to go into this. Okay, so they give you a sense of the types of decisions that are made. So here, if a person were to choose the bottom row, they would give up 20 for a more equitable outcome, right? So this is a typical inequity aversion type of decision. If you here, you know, if you pick the top row, right, then you know you're indifferent, but everybody gains more. This is what we're calling this inequity loving or dominance seeking. This person who picks the bottom row is giving up 20, but the other person's giving up 80. So social surplus is destroyed. Okay. And I'm just going to not be able to run through the slides because I have 1 minute left. Let me just tell you what the results are. So the results are the following: is that this there's two particularly I think two results which really stand out. One is that this dominance seeking, this destroying, you know, willing to give up money to destroy somebody else, it's present in 5% of our subjects in the random match. So it's weak, as you might say. Only 5% of our subjects exhibit that behavior. Okay? I should say 20% of our subjects are completely selfish. They're not inequity averse at all. right, or inequity loving. They're just, all they care about is their own income. So 5% of the subjects are doing this dominance seeking in the random match. In the group context, 20% of subjects are. Actually,
The minimal
22.
group. The minimal group. Or
So
the-
in the
the
middle,
Republican.
so it goes, it ramps up. It goes to 20 and then to 23. But that's that's really important, is that the minimal group is taking up all of the action, right? So if one is that we see this inequity loving when you're on advantageous and inequality ramping up in the group context. Okay, that's point number one.
What groups were you seeing this with? We pair a Republican with a Democrat?
Yes. Well, yes. Yes.
Not a Republican with a Republican.
Right. No. It's so no. But so it's what this is what I'm talking about is how you act towards somebody who's outside of your group. So
In that particular context, like suppose I'm pro-life and I think you're going to give money to Planned Parenthood. I'm going to choose that outcome not because I'm interested in destroying you, but
Right.
because I'm afraid of what you're going to do with that money.
Right, so it's exactly really interesting that the most of it is happening with the minimal group. So the big action is going from no groups to minimal group, and there's only a tiny bit of ramping up from the minimal group to the political group.
So it doesn't take very much
It
to
doesn't
produce
take-
I don't like the other
Yeah,
side.
it doesn't take very much at all, and there's no concern of what you've just said, right? To say, I'm willing to give up money to really hurt you. So I'm going to call this inequity, disadvantageous inequality in the group context. We've got 20% of our subjects doing that. That's result number one. Result number two is that most of our subjects,
Do they take one decision or do
Wait.
they take multiple decisions?
She's got 1 minute
I've
left.
got less. I've got negative minutes left. I've got negative minutes
Yeah,
left.
we can continue.
Yeah. Okay. I just since I was timekeeping for everybody else, I have to keep it within my time. What?
Yeah.
So I'm stopped. Okay. So the second result is that most subjects, okay, do not differentiate between in-group and out-group. Okay. So I just told you that 20% of our subjects slam the other person when they're outside the group, right? But 50% of our subjects do not differentiate between somebody who's in their group and out of their group. And here, okay, so you'd say, okay, that's nice. So, but then we can actually identify these subjects. We actually have correlates of who these people are. So what we think we've uncovered is another trait. So, you know, when we go through these social preferences, we have people who are selfish, people who are fair, people who are inequity averse, so on and so forth. And we're now finding is there's a group of people who they might be selfish, but you know what? They're selfish towards everybody. They might be inequity averse, but they're actually inequity averse towards everybody. Okay, so 50% of the subjects are not affected by any group condition whatsoever. Okay, so the group effects are all on average, but if we look at individuals, there are some people who are not changing their behavior between somebody who's in their group and out of the group, and there are some people who are. But what's interesting, again, so it's not that the average person is behaving differently in the in-group versus out-group. It's only on average, you understand the difference, are behaving differently between in-group and out-group. And these people who are not changing at all, we actually have demographic correlates. Okay? And how we found these people is that we weren't expecting this at all, but we divided the subsample between political independents and political party affiliates in order to study the political group effect. And we found the people who are politically independent do not exhibit changes in behavior in the minimal group setting. These are people who don't join groups. Okay, you get it? They're people who are just not groupie people. You put them in the minimal group, they don't do much.
But this is a within subjects manipulation, and they could be anchored for what they do in one condition versus
But I
the
know
other.
but we tested that. We tested order effects.
No, it's not order. It's consistency. So it doesn't matter which one I do first. I'm going to do the same thing that I do second.
But then why do other subjects change? So whoever these people are, maybe they're anchored. Okay, I'll give you that they're anchored, but we also have correlates. These are also people who are saying that they are politically independent. They're not part of a political party. So it could be that this anchoring is randomly distributed among our subject pool, but it's not. So what we're saying is that there's something about these people, which maybe it's anchoring, maybe they decided they don't want to react to groups, but they're more likely to be politically independent than not. Okay, but I'm out of time. Thank you so much.
Is there anybody who's nice to the other group?
Yes.
There are.
Yes, so the inequity of, so remember I said, so I'm going through, there's a group of people who are inequity averse, okay? Who are inequity averse to everybody.
Right, that's okay.
No, but that means they're being nice to the person in the other group. They're
No,
nice.
but they're only nice more to the other group than to their own.
No,
That's
they're
what I'm-
equally nice.
No, I'm asking
Oh,
if
well,
there are
more.
these other guys.
Oh.
The opposite of the ones you found.
Oh, so the ones who are particularly nice
they're
to
just
somebody.
nice to the other group because they're
Okay,
different.
so I'll tell you what we do have, and I don't know if I can give you the exact answer, but some of our political independents, okay, when you put them in the political group, I'm not saying that they act more nicely to the Republicans than they do to the Democrats. They're all, by the way, on Democratic leaning, so that's a whole other story. But they do not exhibit any, they moved from being, say, selfish to being fair. But it's not clear that they're making a distinction between in and out. But they're put in a conflictual group setting, and the handful of them end up being nicer than they were in another setting, but to both people. You see what I mean? Yeah. Thanks.